Our first speaker, our keynote, is Colonel Adam Ricks. He's a military veteran with a combined total of 26 years of federal state service in the Army National Guard and California State Guard. His service includes 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan. His state service includes serving as the California Military Department's J-33 Director of Current Operations, J-35-7 Director of State Emergency Plans, and training his current assignment as J-8 Comptroller. In his full-time capacity, he has worked alongside CAL FIRE since 2008 to help build and refine, maintain CMD's active when needed Type 2 hand crew program and establish CMD's Joint Task Force Rattlesnake. His significant decorations: Legion of Merit, Bronze Star with an Oak Leaf Cluster, the Meritorious Service Medal, and the Army Commendation Medal. Today, his presentation will be talking about from combat deployments in Afghanistan to the fire lines in Southern California. Leaders must learn from the past to meet the challenges of the present and future. This presentation draws parallels in pre-deployment combat preparation, hard lessons learned in wildfire response, to emphasize the importance of institutional memory to safeguard lives and accomplish the mission. Colonel.
Thank you. Let me turn this on here, see if this works out. All right. Can everyone hear me all right? Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, and thank you to Chief Mahan for inviting me to come down to this conference. I really appreciate the ability to still remain connected to the wildfire community that our department, the California Military Department, is still such a strong part of. So I'll start off by telling a story about 15 years ago. It was a few days before the 4th of July, and I was looking forward myself to setting off some fireworks. Some fireworks that I picked up a few years prior in Wyoming when I was traveling back from Missouri to California after an Army training course. Now, at that time, I was working at our headquarters as our J35 planner, the emergency planner. My job was to coordinate responses, activate units for whatever disasters California had for that summer, which were always search and rescue, but fires were upon us. I'd been working 12-hour days, activating units, planning our National Guard response, writing orders, and running around keeping our general officers up to date on what was going on in this relentless series of meetings that we have, that we call our battle rhythm. It was all about fire response. This role is what earned me the nickname at that time of the fire guy for the California Military Department. And to be clear, I wasn't chosen for this role because of my expertise. I was chosen because I was the only one available, and we really didn't have a robust section for budgets. So that is how I got my start. Well, anyway, the 4th of July came that year, and I was working on the holiday, but I promised myself that after work I was going to drink some beers and light off some fireworks. I knew this would work for stress relief. I knew that because when I signed up in the Army, I enlisted as a 12 Bravo, which is a combat engineer. And for those of you that don't know, in that role, you work a lot with explosives to clear obstacles, Bangalore torpedoes, C4, everything to remove wire obstacles, demolish bridges, demolish airfields. Those were all aspects of my role. If you ever saw the movie Saving Private Ryan, and they're storming the beach, and they have that soldier that holds up a Bangalore torpedo and pushes it under the wire, that was my job. Incidentally, when I was a junior enlisted, I was Bangalore torpedo guy number 4. We would practice the battle drills and run on the back of the armored personnel. And I first asked the young private, okay, what happened to Bangalore torpedo guy number 1 through 3? And so you got about 6 seconds to live and make it count. Anyway, I also learned as a 12 Bravo that it was really fun to light off explosives. So at that time, I was living in Sacramento, where I still live, and I was in an apartment near the American River Parkway on Y Avenue. So I figured after work, I'd go down by the river where it was wet and light off these fireworks. My intent was to aim them towards the water and away from the acres of dry yellow grasses that formed the median between the river and the city. The first couple fireworks went off just fine, but their trajectory was just a little bit off. I didn't think much of it. I just chalked it up to the age of these fireworks. It would have been smart of me to stop there at that point, but I had a lot more stress to let go of, and I figured I'd light off one more big firework before I called it a night. I lit the fuse. The firework went up about 6 feet, then arced back away from the river and directly into the dry grasses, landing about 20 yards away. I could see the smoke the second the firework landed. I put down my beer, I ran as fast as I could in my shorts and sandals and began frantically stomping the fire out. The flames at that point had already gone about 4 feet and were slowly burning an arc away into the grass at a slow rate of pace. Fortunately, though, for me, through my aggressive stomping, fueled by sheer panic, I was able to put the fire out, and my sandals and toes had just got a little singed. I quietly packed up the remainder of my fireworks and determined that I had enough excitement for that 4th of July. When I returned to work the next day, I didn't say a word about it. But as it turned out, during that holiday, there was numerous fires started around the states from fireworks, many of which were undoubtedly started by other patriotic individuals that used my same beer plus explosives equals therapy qualitative decision-making criteria. So that is the extent of my personal experience in fire safety at the tactical level. I'm not qualified to talk to any of you about the tactics of firefighting. That's not what this hour is about, and that's not why I am here. I am here to convince you of the critical importance that past perspective plays to prepare you for your current and future challenges, as well as the importance of finding your purpose and some things that I have learned in my 26-year career about risk and leadership. I am also here to share with you some deeply personal lessons that I've learned about maintaining resilience when the situations seem unendurable. Now, as we begin, despite my current professional comptroller focus on hard currency and cash flow, my personal conviction is that the most valuable resource we have on this planet is our time. It is truly finite for each one of us and grows more valuable by every second that ticks by due to scarcity. No one in this room can truly say how much time any of us truly have left. And for that reason, I won't waste any of yours and will present this wisdom in the two primary learning styles. Hopefully this presentation works. There we are. For any group of people, there's two dominant learning styles. There's the top-down learners that really need to have the points up front, and then the story follows, and that's how they learn. And you know you're one of those 40% if you're right now anxiously waiting for me to make a point. I'm one of those 40% myself. The other 40% are bottom-up learners, and they learn more by hearing the story and the perspective and the information, and then having the points summarized at the end. So for the 40% of you top-down learners in the room, this slide is for you. These are the key points that I'll be going through in this presentation today. So we'll continue with another story. As you heard, my federal service includes 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan. One in 2012 to 13, and another in 2018 to 2019. During my first deployment, I served as a company commander of a bridge building engineer unit known as a multi-role bridge company, an MRBC. This was a foundational experience for me. Serving as a commander in a combat zone was the most rewarding assignment of my entire career. Now, I'm proud of the unit and the men and women that deployed with me as part of the 132nd MRBC. But I'm not proud because the 132nd's mission was successful, or that the unit, to include our river rats and bridge trolls, which were some self-appointed nicknames among the platoon, had set a new record for the most bridge missions accomplished by an engineering unit since World War II. I'm not proud that we had earned permanent recognition with the Federal Meritorious Unit Citation for our accomplishments that mission, an award that I still wear. I am proud because all 186 soldiers of the 132nd returned alive. In so doing, I had accomplished my mission as commander. There's a brief timeline there for you. I'm also proud because before the deployment, The odds of success seemed impossibly high. You see, the MRVC was a new unit at the time it was activated. I took command of the 132nd in 2008. At that time, it was really still 3 legacy units that were combat engineered units, 12 Bravos like myself. The Army had directed us to turn these other 3 units into one multi-role bridge company. It had a lot more personnel and equipment required for that unit than most other units. So in 2008, I took command. That was my role, is to transition these units into a bridge unit. 2011, 3 years went by, the transition was underway, but not yet complete. We received some of our bridge unit equipment, our Rail Level 5 float raft, our float bridge, our IRB, but we weren't there yet. But my time was up. We usually do about 2 to 3 years as a company commander. We had scheduled a change of command, and I was preparing for my next role to go to battalion staff. But something unexpected happened that changed the course of my career and also my life. See, the 132nd received a notification for sourcing a NOS to say you have to prepare to deploy to Afghanistan. Now, just for fun, you'll see these pictures, a little hard to make out, but here's the 132nd building when I'm talking about the improved Ribbon Bridge. This was built at Cache Creek in 2015 to support the Pawnee fire, and they had to go back to Cache Creek in Northern California in 2020 to support the LMU Lightning Complex. I put that there just to let you know there's some history of the 132nd itself participating in firefighting. In those cases, they had to build that float bridge over Cache Creek so firefighters could get access to combat the fire. Fortunately, there's a permanent bridge there now. Also, you'll see on that picture there, that's an example of what a convoy looks like for this bridge company when they're loaded up with our fixed line of communication steel bridges. In any event, my battalion commander had asked me what I wanted to do. Did I want to stay with the unit and take them through deployment, or did I want to just rotate out and move on to my next assignment? He said, you served your time. Your mission really here is done. There's zero expectation for you to stay and take the unit. It was a hard decision, but it was appreciated knowing that it was my call. See, staying with the unit would mean 3 hard, difficult years of command. 1 year to prepare the unit to deploy in the following year in 2012, another year deployed, and a 3rd year to come back and put everything back together again. I knew this would be difficult. My time in command was already difficult on my fiancée at that time, and this would also be a great hardship. But on the other hand, I reflected the cost of not staying in command, and I determined that that option carried a heavier price. That was the price of doubt. You see, I've come to learn that doubt is one of the heaviest things that you can carry. Doubt has a few simple but unalterable rules. Doubt is picked up by asking a question like, would it have made a difference if? Once you've picked up doubt, you can only set it down if you get an answer to that question. If you can't get an answer, you don't get an answer, you will never be able to set that doubt down. You'll carry it forever. So I picked up doubt with the question I asked myself, the question of, if someone else commands the unit and 132nd soldier dies, can I live with that? Because I would always be asking myself, what had happened if I had chosen to stay and lead the unit? I did not and do not consider myself to be a great leader, but at that time I had 3 years of command. I knew my soldiers, I knew the unit, I knew their families, and quite frankly, I was the only one with any bridge experience at all because the unit was new. I didn't want to carry the weight of doubt, and so I stayed. So with that, here's a snapshot of our readiness at that time. See, the first question I asked after deciding to stay was to the National Guard Bureau, and I asked, are you out of your minds? You see, the MRVC, the 132nd, we weren't even done with our transition. We didn't have all the equipment, personnel, or training. We were dead last on the unit status report. There's 12 MRVCs. In the Army, we were 12 out of 12. Why? Because we were missing a lot of our people. We only had 140 out of the 186 assigned, required for that mission. Our training was not much better. We only had 50% of those personnel that we did have, and they'll go through the bridge crew member 12 Charlie course to get trained on that. We'd only ever built a 5-foot raft. We hadn't even built a complete bridge yet. That's only the float bridge, and we hadn't even received any of the Acro Lock B, these line of communication Bailey Bridge style steel bridges that we had. We did some training in the HDSB system, but it's honestly terrible and useless. So it didn't really help in my preparation. So the answer I got back from NGB after asking that question, and I'm paraphrasing, was pretty much, yeah, it sucks. We know that you are not in a great state of readiness. There's only 12 bridge units in the Army, and they've been needed in Iraq up until the last prior year, and they're still needed in Afghanistan. So it's your turn. Commanders, figure it out. So with that, I figured, okay, all right, given our not so advanced state of readiness, perhaps I could narrow our training focus and prepare a bit better if I knew the nature of the mission and where we were going to be operating, precisely what it is that we would be doing. And so you can see there's the actual mission statement. Basically, this comes down to do anything that has to do with bridging whatsoever, to build them, repair them, remove them, assemble them, anywhere in the country of Afghanistan at any time. I'm like, okay, well that didn't help narrow things down at all. But I did get some useful information, which was the terrain of Afghanistan, a little difficult to make out here, but you can see, in the south it's very flat, in the center it's incredibly mountainous terrain as it moves eastwards towards China. And one of our main focus areas was what we called Highway 1, this ring road that goes all around the country. It was a 2-lane paved road just like you'd see anywhere else. That was their main traffic corridor. So with that, what do you do when you have an underprepared unit with an incredibly broad mission set to accomplish over a landmass roughly the size of Texas? So this was our overall strategy. The most important thing that I did to prepare was gain perspective. On the keynote slide, there's the main slides, you see a slogan which is, preparedness is just perspective gathered in advance. That's true. I encourage you to reflect on that as I go through this presentation in your time at this conference. So we'll gather perspective. So the first perspective I gathered was from our combat vets in the unit themselves. I said, in combat where I hadn't at that time. You see, in the Army's infinite wisdom, I wanted to be an MI officer, but when I got a commission, they made me an engineer, and then after I became an engineer, they decided you're not going to do engineering. We're going to put you in charge of a chemical decontamination operation for counterterrorism, and that made total sense, and it's been what I've been doing, from 2004 to 2009. So I asked the combat vets, hey, what should we prepare based on your experience? They said, hey, boss, well, I don't know, where are we going, what are we doing? And I said, hey, I gave them the same mission rundown. And I said, well, in that case, sir, you need 2 things. Dual carry your soldiers' weapon systems, pistols and long rifles, because you don't know your environment, and get more medics than you think you're authorized to have, so I did that, because we need them, and we did. We had a total of 12 Purple Hearts, they were great. I also interviewed a sister company, the 235th Engineers. Now their mission, they got back from Afghanistan the year prior, their mission was route clearance patrol. Basically they're driving 10 to 15 kilometers an hour, slowly in the early morning before the infantry got out of bed, to find all the IEDs and take all the fire before the combat operations began. So they told me something very similar. They said, oh, you need dual-mounted weapon systems on your vehicles. You see, your gunners need tactical options of 240 Bravo, 50 caliber Mark 19. The situation's going to dictate what weapon system you need, and the terrain is diverse. You see in this picture here, this is an Afghan village taken through a windshield, very compact, urbanized terrain, versus this terrain, which is mountain terrain. That's one of our bridge trucks driving through, where Mark 19 might be more effective. I said, okay, great. So we ordered dual mount weapon systems, which is what you see here on these MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush protected vehicles. That's fine. These perspectives help, but the best perspective that I got was from the unit on the ground. We're able to make contact with the unit in theater, 200 MRBC. And they shared their perspective. I said, what are you doing? What was your main mission? And they told us, hey, we have one platoon about half the time conducting bridge repairs on Highway 1 Ring Road. And why do they need to do such frequent bridge repairs? Right here, Afghan jingle trucks. You see, we built our bridges to withstand an M1 Abrams tank, which is a military load class of 110 tons wheeled or 70 tons tracked. I don't know what that weighs, or that Afghan jingle truck, but they were able to defy gravity with the loads that they would put on their system. So they're driving over the steel, they're driving over these steel bridges all the time, and they wear out the deck panels. right? So they basically told us our mission is kind of like combat Caltrans. They go out and repair these bridges, half the time, all on Highway 1 because we were worn out decorated. And that's a picture of first platoon there doing exactly that. I said, okay, that really helps to know. But I asked a simple but incredibly powerful question, which was, what was your greatest risk? And they shared with me what their greatest risk wasn't combat at all. The greatest risk, they said, actually was in the bridge park there in theater. They said they had lost a soldier fatality that was loading up these steel erector-set-style bridges in the bridge park after being incredibly tired, in the middle of the night. And they were loading up one of those panels that assembles that bridge and on a forklift, and it fell and crushed a soldier to death. They told me also that that wasn't just their unit. The MRVC before them had also had a fatality in a very similar manner. Incredibly tired soldiers loading heavy steel bridge in a very confined bridge park with moving vehicles late at night and when completely exhausted. In that case, the prior MRVC, a soldier had gotten between two trucks that were backing up and was crushed between them. Very useful information. Excuse me. So that was our preparation strategy. And by the way, for those of you wondering how we accomplished, filling all of those vacancies, that part wasn't actually hard. You see, in 2012, Iraq had pretty much wrapped up the year before for deployments, and everyone thought that my mission was going to be one of the last missions to Afghanistan, right? Not really, but that's what they thought. And so I had more takers to join this mission than I knew what to do with. And I just ran it like the NFL draft at our soldier readiness prep meetings. I had each platoon interview and pick their own soldiers. They could ask them any questions, whatever they want. It wasn't really because I believed in empowering the leaders I do. It's just I knew if they picked their vacancy or their platoon, they couldn't complain to me about it. If I picked it and it wasn't a good choice, they'd complain all year. If they picked it, they couldn't say a word to me about it. And that worked out great. Anyway, back to the greatest risk. So the advice I got from the 200th was incredibly valuable. You see, a couple months into our deployment, we got a call from our battalion saying that one of the bridges on Highway 1 had been hit with an IED. You see, the Taliban would hide IEDs in bridge infrastructure because they're easier to hide there than, say, on a paved highway. So this is a picture of that bridge right there where the IED had destroyed it. They said, we need you to do a bridge repair immediately. Get out there as soon as you can. The expectation was it would begin work that night and have it complete by morning, because Highway 1 is the main traffic corridor for the entire country. My problem was I had no platoons available. First platoon was out conducting that bridge repair mission, and they were on their way back to Camp Leatherneck where we were stationed. And my second platoon was down in Philippines actually building some seasonal float bridges. See this here, that's an improved ribbon bridge, the same ones that we put in at Cache Creek. They're going to be committed to that for some time. First platoon wouldn't actually be getting back to Leatherneck until late that night. So I had to say, hey, look, I can't do this on your timeline, because when first platoon would get back, by the time they got back to our bridge park, it would be 20 hours with no sleep. By the time they loaded up the bridge, they would be about 30 hours with no sleep, loading these steel panels in the bridge park in the middle of the night. By the time they would actually get out to the site, they'd actually begin their build at 36 hours without sleep, and these builds generally took 24 to 40 hours to accomplish. So that, I can't meet your timeline, so do it. So I used risk assessment. So in the Army, this is our example of our risk assessment worksheet. This is how we calculate risk at all levels. So I rated this risk as extremely high. Why? Because this is the severity of what could happen, the bad thing that would happen, critical. Because I anticipated this would result in the loss of life to have them load up this bridge in the middle of the night. And I also assessed the probability it was likely that this was going to happen. Because the last two MRVCs had this exact same thing happen to them. That's how they lost lives. So I had some argument with my battalion commander at the time, and I turned in the risk assessment, an extremely high rating. It required not him to sign off on the risk to execute the mission, but his own boss. Navy 06 Commandant had to sign off on this risk if they wanted me to meet his timeline. I also shared with him that I contacted the battle space owner and that the traffic hadn't been stopped. The vehicles were able to use the bypass adjacent to the bridge because it wasn't the rainy season there, and then the traffic was slow, but it wasn't stopped. I said I could mitigate this risk, and you could sign off at your level if you just gave me 8 hours of rest for my platoon. So when the first platoon got back, they could rest before loading the bridge. He said, you need to reevaluate your risk assessment. I said, no. One thing you cannot do in the Army or in the Department of Defense is order a commander to change their level of risk. So I said, no, I can't do that. And I cited the example, the exact reasons why, from that, what I got from two MRBC and 2 prior fatalities. And so, basically, it ended with him calling me and said, you get to have your 8 hours. You get your damn day. And he hung up the phone. And while I credit the 200 MRBC with offering the perspective that enabled us to safely execute that mission, I also got perspective from their platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Allen, because I'll never forget that moment. We sent him a warning order when they were driving back on BFT, a text message system, and said, hey, when you get back, prepare for another mission. We don't have details yet. We hadn't had time to give him an update that we got the time for his soldiers to rest by the time he got back to Camp Lebanon. And he kicked open our top door, he took his helmet off, he was just completely worn out, and he said, damn it, sir, if you send us out, we're going to get our soldiers killed. It's like, yeah, I know, calm down, Sergeant. I'm like, I got it, I'm going to shut off the phone. No matter what, he was not going to let this go without offering his perspective. This is just a picture by example, and I don't have any pictures of anything being done unsafe to share with you, fortunately. This is an example of really what that kind of loading this bridge and moving these transducers and panels around looks like. So if you hit one of those things, you're going to get crushed. Again, preparedness is perspective gathered in advance. Here's a slide. Perspective is not unique, and this value is not unique to military operations. These are examples that I pulled from the official reports from the Sawtooth and Calabasas fires you're going to learn more about later today. The Calabasas fire, which you can see in the red box there, is a prescribed incident burn where Richard Lupe lost his life. What you see there is a letter to the Bureau of Indian Affairs Forest Manager from the Tribal Forest Manager, advising against the burn, having cited a recent burn in New Mexico that had escaped the control lines, and they was concerned that the same thing would happen on this burn, and formally advised against moving forward with the prescribed burn. He's offering his perspective. He saw a risk, said something, and said, I don't think this is going perhaps to go well. They moved ahead with the burn anyway. For the Calabasas fire, where you can see there, which is in the gold box, this is an excerpt from Mr. Doug Campbell's Fire Behavior Analysis Report, which is in the final report, directly reflecting on the issue of missing perspective to fall back to safety. And these are his words, but he stated, others who knew the danger in advance were unable to communicate sufficient reason to retreat prior to it being evident by extreme fire behavior actually occurring. Basically, he was writing there and said there's all these situations in which some folks actually know what the danger is, but they don't speak up. He concluded there must be a formal way to actually create a system by which you have to speak up in certain situations and to inculcate that in the fire safety training. I'll cover later in this presentation a few other reasons from psychology why people might not speak up in an effort to try and overcome those challenges. The point is, perspective is incredibly valuable, but it's uniquely valuable when it's heard, understood, asked for, and listened to. Another lesson on perspective came from the 132nd MRBC from Operation Golden Gate. Now this was a challenging bridge mission for us. It required the 132nd to construct two of our most labor-intensive builds. 50-meter triple single acro line communication bridge. That just means there's 3 panels on each side of a single layer, not a double stack bridge. Sometimes bridge nomenclature sounds like you're ordering at In and Out. You have your double, your single double, your triple single, right? But they're really talking about panels and height for these line bridges. It required us to build 2 of those. That was the maximum bridge we could build while still maintaining the highest load classification for tanks or jewel trucks. It required us to work closely with the Navy Seabees for abutment construction. The mission was to really bridge the Helmand River, which was downstream from the Kajaki Dam in southern Afghanistan. There was a lot of challenges with this floodplain. It's a hydrological problem. 2 prior attempts had been made to to bridge this floodplain, one by the U.S. Marines the year before, and also by the British. Both attempts to build a bridge here had resulted in failure due to washout, primarily because the abutments or protections were not sufficient for the extreme changes in water velocity that came across them. They washed out. So how did we approach this problem? Well, first, I got the perspective of a real engineer. I was trained by the Army to be an engineer, but I'm not a professional engineer by training, and this problem is beyond me. Fortunately for me, I found Mr. Bolts, the engineer from RC Southwest. This is how he characterized this problem when he came on board to help me out. He said, the Helmand River is considered a great river due to the network of adjacent channels, shoals, sandbars, and rapids. Braided rivers are known for having erratic hydrologic activity and a dynamic topography which makes predicting either component extremely difficult. Further, any added man-made feature will ultimately have effects that cannot be readily forecasted. So, he was a math-smart, calculating, coding engineer, and so he took to designing what would be, he thought, the most successful option we had, which learned from past perspective as well. This is one of his design schematics of the first bridge for Operation Golden Gate. The biggest change there was shifting from rock gabions to protect bridge abutments, those things you see underneath, to concrete gabions to meet the extreme water velocity, especially when they released water from the Kajaki Dam. That added additional pressures and additional to the seasonal floods. So with his plan together, I felt very confident this was going to work out. I took a trip out and met with the village elder that you see there in the upper right picture to describe our plan. See, this is a very important mission, not just for military operations, but it actually would unite 3 different tribes together. The Musakela, the Sangin, and the Namdad districts were separated by this floodplain, so the local population had interest in getting this done. So I met with the village elder, and we were looking at the site, and he had one question for me, only one question. What are you going to use to protect the abutments? He'd watched the other 2 bridges wash out. I probably answered concrete. At this, he actually brightened up a little bit and said, good, I will plan, a celebration with all the tribes once your bridge is done. I felt great about that. So at this point, I had a real smart engineer that said this plan will work. I had local perspective that said, hey, I think your plan will work, and everything was going well. Sadly, though, our request for concrete was denied. Right? Headquarters decided it was difficult and expensive to resource the concrete, especially as the U.S. was planning withdrawal at that time, but advised us to proceed with the bridge build anyway, because they believed that the rock gabions would suffice. I don't know upon which basis they formed that belief, but it wasn't history. So on my second trip out to the site, when these abutment protective barriers were being in place, the rock gabions, mind you, and the village elder found me. He pointed it out and he said, what is this? He said, you told me these would be concrete. I told him I had some difficult news to share, but that a request for concrete was denied. There was nothing that I could do. He frowned at me. He said he was canceling the celebration, and then he walked away. And I didn't see him again. Now, we did complete these 2 bridge builds successfully, and it was a beautiful sight to behold. You can see one picture down here of us pushing the actual bridge across the gap. You basically weight one side down, you push it a little bit, you build, and you push, and you build, and you push, and that's how you get the thing across the gap. But a few years later, after that deployment, I did receive news that at least one of the bridges had washed out, and the failure was attributed to the lack of sufficient protection for the abutments, the rock gabions instead of concrete. The lesson here is that the situation that I was in had the unusual and unilateral perspective and concurrence of a smart engineer and a local perspective that still was not considered. So I'm just asking you, in your role and whatever you do, fire safety, if you're a decision maker in policy, in process, or resourcing, I implore you to get and consider the perspective of those closest to the problem. You always have the time to get the perspective of the, quote, guy on the ground. Now, although I told the elder there was nothing I can do, I don't think that's quite true. You see, I didn't demand to speak with the lead ISAF engineer or the ISAF civil affairs officer to ensure they fully understood the ramifications of their decision. I didn't advise an alternate course of action, which would have been that it would be better to build these bridges later when the concrete could be made available than to proceed with building bridges that were prone to failure at this moment. Would it have made a difference had I done so? I don't know. And so now I still carry that small price of doubt. Two other lessons that I learned from my deployment time with the 132nd that I want to share with you. One is the value of knowing your purpose and helping others find theirs. You see, I knew what my purpose was in the 132nd. Remember, that's why I stayed. My role, my purpose there was to bring every soldier in that unit home alive. That purpose drove every single decision I make, and there were numerous decisions just about keeping stupid and unnecessary risk away from our mission set. One quick example was as we're getting ready to pack up as a nation, we received orders to go, take back the bridges, right? Recover the bridges and get them ready to ship home. First, I had to have the argument of like, I don't think the Afghan population would like it if I took the bridges that were being used on the highway. They said, okay, don't worry about that. But you still have to recover all the other bridge systems. One was an old DSB system, which was $1 million bridge system, at least when you buy a new one on the Army property books, that had been placed years ago in a Special Forces sector of operations in southern Afghanistan. I knew this was a dangerous area, so I called the battle space owner and said, hey, we've been tasked to go recover this bridge. The SOF operator told me, please don't. And so that bridge is really the only clear footpath we have to get out on our patrols because it's one of the few areas that can't be mined or they can place IEDs. He wanted to keep the bridge as his only safe path. He also told me, hey, if you come out here with those large bridge trucks to try to recover this, your soldiers will die. And I took that perspective to heart. I also found out, hey, what would happen if I recovered this bridge? It had been damaged from artillery and a few other things over the years of abuse. I found out that once I recovered it in such a damaged state, the DOD would just have me turn it into Derma. Basically, it would be turned in for scrap. So it took a little bit of doing, but I asked my SOF partner to see if he could rescind that order to my unit because I wasn't writing any letters home to mothers and fathers telling them that their soldiers, their son or daughter died picking up scrap metal. Again, know your purpose. Do each of you now in your current role know what your purpose is in your role? If your purpose isn't driving the decisions you make, then what is driving the decisions you make? And by purpose, I'm not talking about supporting your family. That might be your purpose in your life. That's just an effect of having a career. What I'm talking about is a relentless, internal, personal commitment that drives how you approach every problem and how you measure risk, and how you see every situation. So I encourage you, if you don't have something that sounds like that, reflect today and reflect on the perspectives and stories you hear here to help find it. Now, there's no downside in finding your purpose. In fact, it's strongly positively correlated in every working profession with retention, job satisfaction, and innovation. 2021 McKinsey study found that 70% of employees surveyed at work said that their work was a major source of purpose in their life. That sounds great. The survey also found that 85% of executives found that they were living their purpose in the work that they did as a profession. That's also great. But only 15% of frontline employees stated that they were living their purpose or knew what it was. The point of the study is just because you may know what your purpose is, if you do, others you work with may not know theirs. Another lesson is leadership is taking care of the people that take care of the mission. That might sound familiar to you because Simon Sinek said it in many of his presentations. And he's right. But I learned this lesson long before I knew who Simon Sinek was, probably long before he gave a presentation like that. I knew this is my job as a commander because it was the thing that I was so often repeatedly asked to do. Family members at pre-deployment ceremonies and drills would come up to me and they would tell me exactly that. Take care of my son. Take care of my daughter. Take care of my husband. Take care of my grandson. Take care of my sister. Senior commanders and sergeant majors would also come up and send us on our way. They'd give a great speech and motivating words, but afterwards, they'd come find me, they'd drop all pretense of rank and position. They'd simply tell me, take care. Take care of our soldiers. Now, if you haven't already been convinced from my experience and the data that I just shared with you, there's another reason that you should look to find purpose in your work. And you see this graph on the right is from a 2022 study pulled from the Department of U.S. Labor and Statistics, and it represents who Americans spend their time with from the ages of about 20 through about 80. These are hours per day. So you see highlighted there in the yellow box, from the age of about 25 until you retire about age 60, you are spending about as much time with your coworkers as you do with your spouse or your child, right? So the people you work with aren't going away. The environment you're in isn't going away. So make the most of it by finding and sharing your purpose, and if you can get there, having a shared purpose, which will help with unity of effort. Conversely, I just would also want to point out that after age 60, you see the steep slope here, that's 60 to 80. Most Americans spend their time alone. It's a cold fact. So for another reason, this time in your life, the people you work with, these experiences, they're not going to come again in your life. You'll miss them when they're gone. And so make the most of the time you have in the role that you're in. Another few important lessons: stay genuinely interested in your team and the mission that you perform. Stay genuinely curious about it. So one quick story about curiosity about midway through this deployment. Our battalion had what they called Hero of the Battle. That sounds grandiose, but it really amounted to once a week, every company in the battalion would nominate a soldier for some positive impact that they were having on the mission they were doing. It wasn't always about extreme combat situations, everything from improving administration to vehicle efficiency, innovation, just to recognize soldiers. Whoever was picked would get a coin from the battalion commander for the Hero of the Battle for that week. So it was my turn to nominate Hero of the Battle, and I went out to decide a support platoon hadn't been nominated, so I went to go out to the motor pool to talk to support platoon. They're in charge of bulldozers and recovery vehicles and those kinds of things. Went out to talk to the motor pool folks, all things were going, after a long conversation, hey, anyone done anything heroic in support platoon lately? It's Hero of the Battle time. And they said, you mean other than what Pacheco and Warby did? And I'm like, what are you talking about? What did Sergeant Pacheco and Warby do? And so they relayed to me this crazy but true story. They said, last week, Pacheco and Warby, they were out on the Bridgefield mission. They got a call from another sector that an Afghan fuel truck driver was pinned underneath the cab. The fuel truck had overturned, and they went out to rescue him. I said, what are you talking about? Excuse me. So they showed me the picture, and it was like read out of a Hollywood movie. So they went out there with this MRAP recovery vehicle, which is like a wrecker or this tow truck thing. They drove 3 miles away from the bridge site to respond to this call. When they got there, the Afghan driver was pinned underneath the cab. The gasoline was pooling around from the sparks from the electrical systems, and battery was still sparking right near the gasoline. It was really rich prime to explode. I wish I had a picture of it, but I don't. Anyway, they disconnected the battery, and they lifted carefully the cab off of the Afghan truck driver, saved his life, prevented an accident. I said, okay, thanks for telling me that. You guys are clearly going to win Hero of the Battle this week. So I wrote that up and sent it up. Clearly, they got the point, obviously. But, after reading the story, both my battalion and Navy Commandant Command said, this is incredible. You need to put them in for the Soldier's Medal. I said, I didn't even know what the Soldier's Medal was. The Soldier's Medal is one of the most prestigious awards you can receive in the military. It is ranked above the Bronze Star Medal, and it's the highest award you can receive for valor in a non-combat situation, often awarded for saving lives like this. So I did that, and it's a prestigious award. So we didn't receive it until 2014, but here's a picture of Specialist Warby being awarded the Soldier's Medal in Eureka, California by Major General Haskins, who was our Army commander at the time, 2-star general. And here's Sergeant Pacheco receiving his award in 2014 after he'd left the service after the mission at his graduation for corrections. Interesting story. Specialist Warby, they asked me, hey, where should we do this ceremony? I said, I don't know, ask the soldiers who are in the metal. And the Specialist Warby said, my grandma can't travel, so you got to do it in Eureka. So the generals flew up in a helicopter and presented there in Eureka, so his grandma could see. So that's just one example of the importance of staying curious. Another example, I don't have pictures for it, but we get these impossible bridge build missions in the beginning of this deployment. These just crazy things we couldn't do. Go build a bridge in this small remote canyon in northern Afghanistan. We would look at the mission and be like, we can't even make the turns with the vehicles we have to load this bridge. This is physically impossible. We'd write back and say, yeah, we can do it, but we have to airlift it in. And it's going to require 2-week dedication of every aviation asset and theater just to move this bridge. And we're like, okay, yeah, never mind. So we had a few of these missions. I'm like, who's giving these missions? Like, who's saying, hey, go build this? It doesn't make any sense. So I stayed curious. I found out it was a German engineer, from our NATO partners at ISAF headquarters. He was a brilliant engineer, but he didn't know anything about the capabilities of the 132nd. We're the only bridge builders in the entire country. And when I finally got to talk to this German general officer, he's like, thank God you called me. He's like, I've just been winging it. I've just been sending these missions down and just hoping that you guys could do it. I don't know, I just see what comes back, But I was like, that ain't good. So we changed the system. I took a very intelligent NCO that was bridge smart, sent him up there to be the LNO, so when requests would come in from battle space owners, our NCO would look at it and be like, yeah, either we need to go do a recon, see if we can do it, or hell no, we can't do it. And so then we either would have a reconnaissance to determine what we could do, and we'd say no to these missions. Vastly improved the efficiency of bridging overall, but just because I asked, who's giving me this mission? Where did these orders come from? Staying curious and speaking up really pays off. Now, on a bit more of a sour note, I really want to impart the importance of risk. And risk, if I were to summarize it, is when you see it, own it, and be insistent, even if it's not your lane. So again, maybe about a third of the way through the deployment, our battalion had taken about 20 of my bridge building soldiers and take them away from my command, on them to another unit, so they could support a road building mission in the Horn of Panjshir. At that time it was known as the Heart of Darkness due to the extreme embedded amount of Taliban fighters in that area. Their mission was to escort these Afghan gravel trucks, which you see there, in a combat convoy, so they can lay the gravel so the roads could be built. So we were security. And while they're no longer within my chain of command or officially my responsibility, I stayed curious about their mission. I looked at the first concept of operations that they were given to do this security mission for these gravel trucks. And I looked at it and I noticed that the gravel truck to gun truck ratio just wasn't quite right from my experience. It was 1 gun truck to 8 or 9 gravel trucks, causing them to be spaced out over a good geographic distance. Now, as a reference, our standard ratio was 1 gun truck to 4 non-gun trucks when we did our convoy. So this was doubling, basically, our risk tolerance for this mission. I said, this doesn't seem right, but these soldiers aren't in my command. I am not a tactical expert in convoy operations. I'm a bridge company commander. I wish my soldiers well, and I said, hey, if you need anything, let me know. But I didn't speak up about the risks that I saw. So sure enough, that first mission, that same CONOP was executed. And the gravel trucks were attacked by the Taliban. 2 trucks were incinerated. 2 Afghan gravel truck drivers lost their lives. And my soldiers, 132nd soldiers, they were safe. They reacted. They drove the enemy off with accurate return fire, but they were exposed to unnecessary exceptional risk by being forced to dismount, to go trek on these gravel truck drivers, to try and save their lives, and ultimately unnecessarily exposed to the lifelong trauma of seeing people burned alive. Now, would it have made a difference if I had spoken up about my concerns about the CONOP? I don't know. But I invite you to again consider that's the cost of doubt. That's a doubt that I picked up. I'll never get an answer to that question, and that's still a weight I carry. You can see their example of what one of the burnout trucks looks like. So again, my point is it wasn't my lane, but I didn't say anything. But it didn't matter if it was my lane. It probably would have made a difference. just invite you to reflect on that a bit. Another lesson in speaking up, and when you see risk, say something and take ownership, even if it's not your lane, came on the 14th of September 2012. So we're stationed at Camp Leatherneck with the U.S. Marines, and on the other side with the UK at Camp Atherton. So on 14 September 2012, in the middle of the night, my operations staff from our operations center woke me up to tell me that the base was under attack. I quickly ordered 100% accountability of all my soldiers, brought them into the bridge chart, told them to man their gun trucks at every point of entry and be ready. Be ready to do what? I don't know. Repel invaders, go support the response. What happened in that attack, and mind you, these bases are massive. This was like a small town, so I couldn't even hear the sounds of the battle from where we were stationed, on the other side of the installation. What happened during this attack was 15 Taliban fighters disguised themselves in U.S. Army uniforms. You can see a picture of them there. This was a video that was released after the attack by the Taliban. They disguised themselves in stolen Army uniforms, breached the Bastion security perimeter, which you can see here. This is a flight line. This is their breach point on the east. And 3 heavily armed teams with RPGs and crew-served weapons, AK-47s. They broke into 3 teams and attacked the flight line. As a result of this heavily coordinated attack, 2 Marines were killed, 17 Allied personnel were injured, the 6 Harrier aircraft were destroyed. It was the first time since World War II that the maintainers assigned to these had to pick up a rifle and fight back. You can see here in this picture one of the burnt-out Harrier jets from that attack. And in our bridge park, by the time we knew what was going on, the battle was already over. The Marines had managed to get 3 helicopters in the air, and the British QRF had responded. Now, all but 1 of the 15 Taliban that attacked were killed. Now, you see, the key lesson comes back to perspective and risk. I didn't know if there was anything that I could do before the attack that would have made a difference, but I did know that there was something I could do to help. I knew there was something I could do to help because that's exactly what we did after the attack. Right, so these pictures you see on the right are bulldozers, and what they're doing is cleaning up pesco barriers and reinforcing earthen berms for the security perimeter at the point of breach. That's my unit doing that. I knew we had this capability the whole time. It would have been difficult to coordinate, but I didn't look at base security as my responsibility. There's a whole task force in charge of base security. But since we were able to help afterwards, it meant we could have helped before. I ask you to reflect on that as well. I also would add that I knew enough to act. See, I'm a jogger, I run, so most mornings I'd be running around, Camp Leatherneck Bastion Complex for the days I was on post. And I could see for myself that many of these guard towers were not manned, or they were manned by broomsticks. I also knew from the shared intelligence reports that children were coming up on this eastern perimeter and tugging at the wire. We call that probing, an effort to gauge our response, see what our reaction would be to assess or potentially plan for attack. I also knew that they had a high-value target that they were targeting on the Bastion site, which was Prince Harry. He was stationed there with us at the time, known as Captain Windsor, formerly, by the way. But they had made numerous threats to say, we are going to kill you, Prince Harry. So I knew they had an intent and how value target they were probing. So I knew enough to know that these were problems, but I also knew that security force personnel knew that. Again, I didn't say anything. It wasn't my lane. Had I said something, I would have found out, which was later reflected in the official 15.6 for this incident, which was that security forces were stretched thin because due to the drawdown, the forces available in that sector to divide against operations and security were let down from 7,000 to about 700. That's one of the reasons that we had unmanned towers there. I would have been able to share my capabilities and done something, but I didn't bring it up. It wasn't my lane. Again, here's the official 15.6 investigation from that attack from the US side. The UK side I read is equally scathing, but it summarizes, it basically states that all these ingredients were there. It was a matter of coordination to bring them together. They quote state, the alternatives for better unit effort existed before the attack. It was about coordinating resources. It's hard to coordinate resources when you don't actually know what they were because nobody tells you what it is they can do about a problem. Now, the report on the right, it comes right from the 2009 station fire. And what I wanted to highlight is this phrase that's repeated throughout the AAR. In this particular case, they were citing that county helicopters had the capacity to do night drops on the fire line, but were prohibited from doing so by U.S. Forest Service policy at the time. The author states, would night flying have made a difference? No one can say for sure, but night flying as a policy change that is needed. Now again, the value of perspective. And I understand that that's pretty commonplace in night flying now. All right, I'm going to put away some of my deployment experiences for the moment and just come back to a lane of fire experiences. What you see here is another lesson in being insistent on risk that I got from CAL FIRE. So what you see in this picture, this is an LMTV, a light mobile tactical vehicle, and you see a lot of firefighters. Those are CAL Guardsmen loaded up in these LMTVs. You see in the early days of our Type 2 hand program, call when needed, our force package model, what we would bring to the fight would be our soldiers and a way to transport them. Now, which is Army vehicles. And this is what the Army gives you, to transport soldiers in mass for the most part. There's various other vehicles, but they didn't really suit for mass transportation. You see a picture down below of all those LMTVs parked at a fire camp in Wairika for this very purpose. Now, you might be thinking, that looks a bit risky, and you're right. See, these high-profile vehicles with just a troop strap in the back were dangerous to take out on Forest Service roads due to their risk of rollover in the steep terrain. And we knew this, but more importantly, CAL FIRE, our partners in this mission, knew it. And they pointed out, and they didn't let it go. So from about 2011 to 2014, we tried to make this work with LMTVs, and we tried everything to mitigate the risk. We brought in master drivers trainers. We tried to take them on the most difficult training roads that we had at Camp Roberts, put them over through rollover training. But there was just no way this was going to be safe. CAL FIRE, my friend John Winter at the time, he wouldn't let it go, he wouldn't leave it alone. I tried to tell him, John, these are the vehicles that the Army gave us. I don't know what to tell you. He even looked at trying to get Stryker vehicles, which are these combat vehicles with a wider platform. We didn't have enough of them, they would have been too heavy for the roads. He said, Adam, we got to figure it out, we got to do something different. John was right. Ultimately, at some point after 2014, we did have an LMTV rollover on a fire mission. Now, fortunately, there was no injuries at that time because the soldiers had the presence of mind when the road started getting dicey to dismount the vehicle and walk behind it. So there was no one in the back at the time. But the point is, we ultimately did make a change. That incident and CAL FIRE's insistence forced us to change our model. On the right-hand side, you'll see this little graphic. This is our force package, what we actually bring to the fight today. Instead of seeing LMTVs, high-profile vehicles like Ford F-150 trucks. Now, it required us to make a lot of changes and find ways to get Enterprise to secure a ton of different rental vehicles available at a moment's notice. But CAL FIRE partners with on that. They agreed to the extra costs, and that's how we roll out today. Again, I learned this lesson from CAL FIRE. It wasn't their lane to mitigate our risk and what we brought to the table, but they wouldn't let it go. I also wanted to bring up something, a lesson that that goes back to an experience I had in 2017. So 2017 had the Northern California wine country fires. Now, and there was a lot of lives lost in those fires, and the response was widely criticized publicly for the decision not to use the wireless emergency alert system to notify everyone about the danger of the fire. They had a robocall system at the time that people could subscribe to, and they utilized that. That was October in 2017. But in December of 2017, Ventura County had saw what had happened in Sonoma, and they looked at all the situations and said, you know what, we're going to make a change. We're going to institute a WEA system and use it for whatever fire comes next. And in December 2017, the Thomas Fire happened. Ventura County emergency managers used the WEA system, learning from Sonoma County. That's a picture of that emergency alert. And as a result, they had a successful evacuation for that fire. Now, I'm not saying, for the record, that Sonoma County officials made a mistake. I'm not here to second guess the decisions that they made. I'm saying Ventura County saw something that said this would look like a solution for us in our situation. Sonoma County had risks to weigh in mind when it came to, if you alerted everyone and the fire's not affecting everyone at one time, there's problems with egress. The mass evacuation could actually get people trapped, and they had some different framing around it. So I'm not saying they made the wrong decision. I'm saying someone else took a proactive measure to learn from the perspective of what happened in that fire and make a change in their own county, and the change made a difference for them. Someone saw what happened somewhere else, spoke up, and did something. Now, those pictures you see there are ones that I took as my battalion was activated to respond to the 2017 fires. We were headquartered in Santa Rosa at the time, and having to dig through remains and burnt-out buildings and look for bones and things of that nature for secondary screening was just a difficult mission for our soldiers. But again, it's the value of the perspective and how fast that can move. It was only 3 months from one incident to another, and someone instituted a positive change. Now, so I've talked a lot about the importance of perspective and speaking up and offering advice. But if it's so important and it's so helpful to get help, to get perspective, why don't we do that? Why do we have these barriers to speaking up? Well, there's a few reasons from psychology for that. One's the self-reliance bias. I mean, just be honest, asking for someone's input and perspective is a lot like asking for help, and we're pretty bad at asking for help. Here's a few reasons why. Self-reliance bias. Basically, it's where people assume that they can handle their problems alone. I got this. Now, there's a clear example comes from a British automobile study that found that men will drive an average of 276 miles a year rather than ask for directions. Average man will be lost for 30 minutes before they decide to get perspective, okay? False self-reliance bias. I know, I've been there. Thank God for GPS now. Another really important barrier that we all have is the imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome is when you fear that asking for help will expose you as a fraud or someone who's ignorant about a subject matter. It's illustrated here. You see this little blue circle demonstrates what people think they know compared to what they think others know, a greater mass that you see in the yellow circles. We're all going around thinking, I'm not an expert. Bill, he's an expert. That person's an expert. If I ask a question here, if I ask for help, I'm going to be exposed as someone who doesn't know something I'm supposed to know that everybody else knows. We all walk around with this bias. And numerous studies have found this simply isn't true. The reality looks a lot more like this picture below, which is what you actually know is fairly on par with what everyone else knows. And by the way, everyone else might stay in silence, and that causes its own problems from not speaking up, and then issues go by. I'm also going to talk about one of my favorites, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Who's ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Okay, a few of you. Okay, so I'm really excited, by the way, to talk about this stuff because my undergrad was in psychology, and they said you'll never use it. I use it every day, and it's really fun to talk about these studies and these things. Right, well, Dunning-Kruger effect is really what you would call a high confidence, low competence scenario, right? So you have someone who is very confident they know everything, that they're doing everything well, but in reality, they're not. They have low confidence in what it is that they're doing. So that when someone has high confidence but low confidence, the official term for that is Mount Stupid. The very top of this when you know nothing, but you think you know everything, you're on the peak of Mount Stupid. When they did the study in 1999 that gave its name from Dunning-Kruger, they measured folks in 3 different aptitudes on a test for like grammar, logical reasoning, one other thing. The people who scored in the bottom 25% had thought they did really well compared to others. And when even though that wasn't true, when they went to explain this effect, they basically summarized saying, hey, the things that you need to do well in these tests are also the same skills and abilities that you need to recognize that you're not doing well. Like, you have to be smart enough to know that you're not smart or doing well, right? That was their main attribution. So in most circumstances, something very bad has to happen to disabuse people, to get them down from Mount Stupid, and to force them to reconcile with reality. They don't actually know everything. When something really bad happens, they fall into the valley of despair because they thought they were, they thought they knew. They're just really destroyed. Smart folks will finally start to ask for help, actually gain knowledge base, and get themselves on the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of sustainability. Basically, things are running well. There's other reasons for the Dunning-Kruger effect, though, and as leaders, I see this happen all the time. If the only news you're willing to tolerate or you solicit from others is good news, then you're going to fall victim to this. Why? Because you're going to think everything's going well. You're going to have high confidence that things are going well, but you're going to be ignorant completely of the real problems that are going on because you don't ask for them. You don't create a framework for getting those problems. You don't get that feedback. So, by the way, if this sounds like someone you know, gently find a way to get them down to Mount Stephen before Or I also want to explain a few things. Pluralistic ignorance. These are also barriers, not why we have a hard time asking for help, but these are barriers to why I have a hard time giving advice and speaking up. Now remember from the Calabasas fire when the final report said, hey, folks have a difficult time speaking up and offering their perspective at the time of meeting. Some reasons for that, I can come back to psychology again. One is pluralistic ignorance, silence that spreads consensus. Now I guarantee everyone in this room has been a party to pluralistic ignorance at one time or another. This illustration does a very good job from Cognitive Corner. Point this here is the teacher's asking the class, is everyone clear about the assignment? And all the students are like, yes, I got it. You know, no problems, no questions. And inside they're actually thinking, I don't understand what this is at all. I'm going to have to ask someone after class what we're talking about. They'll say, yeah, I'm good, I got this. The effect is when no one speaks up, each person reads silence as a signal that there is no problem. Right? So when you're a group of people and no one's saying anything, everyone's just assuming that everything's good because no one else is saying anything. Remember the imposter syndrome? We assume everyone else knows more than us. So if everyone else who knows more than us, in our mind, isn't saying anything, well, we say something. That's a barrier to offering perspective, and it's with us every day. The bystander effect, I'll talk about that in a second. But one way that we can lower these barriers is in our briefings and how we conduct them. So in military, I'm sure in firefighting, we do a lot of call-out briefs, mission briefs, tell people what's about to happen. I don't know about you, but a lot of the briefs I have been a part of sound a lot like this. Hey, we're going to go to objective so-and-so, we're going to accomplish this task for this reason, then we're going to do this thing. Anyone got any issues? Any problems? Right? Now, when you put it to folks like that and say, does anyone have any issues or concerns, the pressure is silence. So it sounds a lot like, psychologically, it sounds a lot like, hey, I made this plan, you got a problem with it? Right? It puts pressure on you to speak out against what somebody just said was the plan. A better way to frame that is to simply ask one question. What am I missing? So when you ask, what am I missing versus do you have any issues, you're inviting perspective. You're inviting people to contemplate what are the missing ingredients, not to challenge the plan, what was just spoken to you, or to have you risk coming out of your shell with the imposter syndrome and potentially admit your ignorance of something you don't understand. You're asking for perspective. So when you're giving your mission briefs, I just encourage you, if you have the opportunity, just ask that question. What am I missing when you're making these plans? Versus, anyone got any issues? Everyone understand. What am I missing? Now, the bystander effect. Has anyone heard of the bystander effect before? Okay, well, this is a little bit fun to talk about. So the bystander effect is this. The more people there are, the less likely chance they're going to intervene in the situation. So this illustration basically says, hey, when you're alone in a disaster, this is a really janky burning building example, they're compelled to act. Say, I see the problem, it's just me, I have to do something. When you have a few people, like 2 or more in a situation, there's less likely to act in a smaller group. 62% will respond. And in a larger group, it continues to go down, those numbers, at 31%. Now, these numbers come from something, because for every one of these effects or psychological truisms, there's a story for how we found that out. So I'm just going to nerd out for a minute and talk about how we know that. This story goes back to Darley and Latane in 1968. They did 2 studies that proved basically the existence of the bystander effect. These studies were done after a 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese, where there was 37 witnesses and nobody stopped to intervene in the murder. So they were driven by a real public need. Anyway, these numbers, 85, 62, and 31%, come back to their first study where they took college students. And they lied to them. And they said, hey, you know, you're going to be on an intercom system, and I want you to talk to other students about your feelings about being in college and the college experience, right? So they put them in these rooms, and they said, the reason you're on intercoms and you're in your own separate rooms is so you don't have to, you know, share feelings or, just be confronted with somebody face to face. That was the reason they gave. In reality, what they did is they paired a confederate, basically someone who was working for the psychologist. So in one scenario, and this confederate would pretend to have a seizure while on the intercom. They would tell them up front, hey, I'm prone to seizures, and then they would actually pretend to have a seizure while on the other line of the intercom. So what the study found out is these exact statistics. When there's just one person on the other end of this intercom and someone seemed to be having a seizure, 85% would immediately step up and go get help, go out, find a professor saying, I think something's wrong with the person on the other end. When you had 3 people in the study, that is, one person pretending to have a seizure, one Confederate student who basically does nothing, and the actual subject, only 62% did anything. They waited the full 6 minutes of the experiments before they would go for help, but they didn't go for help at all. And we had 3 or more personnel, that is, 2 other people who weren't reacting to the supposed seizure that worked for the psychologist and the seizure person. Only 31% actually did anything. Everyone else just sort of ignored it. Because other people were ignoring it, so the subject of the study would ignore it. They did another study in 1968. It's called the Smoke-Filled Room Study. Perhaps a little more apropos for this meeting. The Smoke-Filled Room, they did a similar approach. Basically, lied to students again. Again, deception is common in early psychology. They say, hey, sit in this room and fill out this questionnaire. And as the student was filling out the questionnaire, they started to pipe smoke into the room. Okay, ethics were different in like the 1960s for psychology, okay? It wasn't like Stanley Milgram where they had someone pretend that they shot someone to death, which is a whole different experiment. No, but they were piping this smoke into this room, this harmless supposed smoke, this room where they're filling out the questionnaire. And in the smoke study, pretty much immediately, students, when they were by themselves filling out the questionnaire, they got up and left and they reported the incident. But when you had another student, again a Confederate, one student who was the real subject and one who worked with the professor, they're both filling the questionnaire. The one that worked with the professor was told to do nothing, just don't react to the smoke at all. So in that scenario, again, it was very few people actually responded. The students would sit there for a full 6 minutes of do nothing. They just ignored the smoke. Someone would put their t-shirts up over their nose. They were coughing. They couldn't see anymore, but they didn't say anything. And it got worse and worse. The more students that were in there that were told to just ignore it, that worked for the professor, not say anything about the smoke, the fewer students could actually, the fewer students that were subject to the study would actually do anything about it. The point of all this is that your social programming, your social norms, can and will override your sensory experience. When you learn about Calabasas and other fire studies, just keep some of these concepts in mind for white folks who know something you might not speak of. Now, these are a few lessons I learned from my second deployment. I'm not going to go through the details of that deployment with you, but in 2018, 2019, the short version is I was assigned as the Chief of Operations in southern Afghanistan. My role there was vastly different from my first mission. My first mission, I was on the ground building bridges right. This time, I was conducting a Combined Joint Operations Center. My main role was to coordinate a kill chain, basically use drones and different weapon systems available to us to apply maximum pressure to the enemy to try and get them to capitulate and come to the table with the Afghan government at that time. It was an incredibly stressful deployment for me. Not because I was in any personal danger, no, I was pretty much indoors the whole time, just because I was working 12 to 16 hours a day, every day, trying to line up these strikes and balance the need to take enemies off the battlefield without taking any civilians off the battlefield. It was a stressful situation. And during that time, it was the job was so important I wasn't even permitted to sit down in the chow hall and eat meals with my fellow soldiers. I had to take every meal back to my desk. There was no days off for personnel assigned to this role, no half days off. So it was 10 months straight, 12 to 16 hours a day, every day doing this. And with those difficult decisions, one day to the next, I didn't have time to mentally process or even know the true impacts of a lot of these strikes and my actions before the next shift and the next day had to begin. So I bring this up because I had to dig deep to learn lessons of how to get through this 10-month slog in this role every day. So these are some of the lessons that I learned from that time. One is from Marcus Aurelius, who said, focus on what you can control and not what you can't. Honestly, his quote was, love the hand that fate deals you and play it as your own. Meaning you don't get a choice of circumstances you're going to find yourself in, on a fire incident, on a mission, on a deployment. But you can control how you respond to that. You control how you can act on that. You can't change when you're in a difficult situation. You just have to change what you can do about it. Control what you can control. Another one comes from Nietzsche, which is, love your fate. Amor fati. Wherever you are in life, just love what it is that you're doing. Find and look for those positive aspects. Another one, came actually from Disney's Frozen 2, which is a bit surprising. But when you watch that, there's that song, when Anna's trapped in the cave, do the next right thing, right? And it's actually a very useful representation of Chunky taking things in small time and small parts and focusing on the very next step. But I thought, that song was awfully powerful, for a Disney sequel when I first heard it. I'm like, it's got something to it. I researched the song, and it turns out it was written because there's two members of the Frozen crew from Frozen 1 and Frozen 2 had lost a child between the making of the first and second movie. And this song was written to reflect their struggles. So just don't look at the whole big picture when you're in a massive disaster situation response. Focus on the next thing you have to do and take it in small steps. That's what I did with my job every day. The last one is the difference between responding and reacting. Musashi Miyamoto was Japan's most famous samurai. He lived around 1600. He fought in 60 duels, then lost one in his career. He wrote the Book of Five Rings, worth reading if you ever get a chance. And this is magnum opus about the wisdom he wished to impart. But one bit he had to talk about in fighting and winning and surviving was the difference between reacting versus responding. And he talked about when you have these emotions, especially anger or whatever, you can't let it take control of you. So you have to acknowledge that the emotion is there, that you're feeling this emotion. There's a difference between saying, I am feeling angry, and saying, I am angry. So when we phrase things saying, I'm angry, who's driving? The emotions drive, right? It's taking you around like a dog on a leash. So whatever you have to do to create space in those difficult moments between something happening to you and your reaction to it, don't let the emotion drive. Another Japanese swordsman offered a different analogy from that time. He basically stated, all these emotions that are coming to you, they're like an uninvited guest into your home. Excuse me. Find out what the guest wants, and then get them to leave. Meaning, hey, if you're angry, what are you angry about? I'm angry because I'm hearing this sucks. Okay, acknowledge that it sucks. Thank you, anger. It's now time to leave and we get on with life, right? Creating that space between something happening to you and how you respond to it is probably the most important thing that you can do when making a critical decision. If you feel like you're making decisions automatically, they might not be the right decisions for you to make. Now, from the opening, the purpose of this conference is to have conversations, share experience, and I try to relate to you the importance of getting perspective, which is widely available from everyone's career in this room. And I know that the beer and wine are going to help as well. But I also wanted to offer just a few tips about how to have better conversations. So I don't think we're actually very good at this inherently. A few ways to have better conversations. And why is that? So, for example, you could say, instead of, how are you? Ask, what are you most excited about in your life right now? There's a psychological difference there. There's this thing called the negativity bias we each have. It comes back to the theory of evolution, right? Because we're biased to focus on negative things and risks. We're focusing on those things our whole life. Because if you don't notice, the predator that's behind the rock and he kills you, there's a price to be paid for not noticing or observing or paying attention. Then you're dead. But if you don't notice something positive, the sunrise or whatever, no, there's no consequence for not noticing the positive. So So inherently, we focus on all the negative things in our life. And that plays out in conversations. When you ask someone, how are you? Most of the time, where does your mind go? Do you think, oh, I'm joyous, I'm having a great day? You might say that, but you're probably running through a quick carousel in your mind of all the stuff that's not going well in your life, and it's probably not really great to think about it. When you ask something like, what are you most excited about in your life right now? It triggers a positive, it forces you to think positive about what's going on. And I promise you, you're going to learn more about that person, what they have to say. Another one is, what is one memory you most treasure? You know, that forces people to think about the positive parts in their life. And versus like, hey, where did you grow up? You say, where did you grow up? People might give you a safe answer because there's negatives and positives to most of our life stories. What's the most important lessons you've learned in the past year? A great question. Versus like, hey, what are your hobbies? You know, it's a better question to ask. I'd also ask you to consider, what is your greatest risk? You know, in your respective departments. Ask that question and see what comes back as answers. How do you recharge? You know, that's how do you recharge as a person? A better way to ask them, what are your hobbies? Because if somebody say, hey, what is your hobbies? You're going to get the safe answer. You're going to get something like, oh, you know, running, skiing, whatever. They're not going to tell you whatever hobbies they're worried that you might not approve of, okay? They might not tell you, hey, I love to build model trains or whatever it is. Probably not going to offer that information to you. You can talk about, hey, how do you recharge? You're going to learn a lot about the person. Force them to reflect on recharging. Last, I'd say, it's not really for this conference, although I suppose you can try it out, is when you're having difficult conversations, have them very simply, honestly, and openly. Say, I need to have a difficult conversation with you. The most difficult conversations I had were from my first deployment, where I had to tell grown men that they could not go home to see their first child born because that was not the policy at the time. You could only go home at that time if there was an immediate risk to the life of the mother or the child. If you want to see grown men cry, you know, tell them that. So I had to learn how to have difficult conversations. And honestly, just that statement, I need to have a difficult conversation with you. Most people are really good about telling someone else about what they're going to tell someone else is their problem and a difficult conversation. We're very bad at actually telling someone an honest truth. We'll start beating around the bush and say, hey, I was thinking about, or I want to talk to you about, or what do you think about this? To try and get a self-confession. Please don't do that. You have to have a difficult conversation for the professionals in your team or your response. Just say that. I need to have a difficult conversation with you. I didn't select you for promotion this cycle because of these reasons. I expect that you will do better next cycle, you're on the right track, things like that. All right, last, in closing, this is the bottom-up slide for all you bottom-up learners. Just to reiterate some of the key points throughout all these stories. Preparedness is perspective gathered in advance. If you have perspective, you have decades of perspective in this room. Gather it now. This perspective, it's free today. Right now today, perspective is free. It's a conversation. It's priceless tomorrow when someone else isn't available to offer it to you, but it's unavailable when you need it most. If you don't learn these lessons from history, if I hadn't asked about the greatest risk in 200 MRBC, I would have been prepared to deal with that risk when it came to my own unit, right? Just consider that for where you work in your sector, in your profession. Know your purpose and help others find theirs. And risk, when you see it, own it. Be insistent even when it isn't your lane. Last, on resilience, I just wanted to close by telling you that hardship is inevitable. Face it one step at a time and recognize that the most difficult moments of life are just the transcendence between the ordinary and the profound. It is those moments that you are being forged into something greater and appreciate the truth found in how you are challenged to your absolute limit. If you're approaching the end of your limit, just remember that you are not alone. Thank you.